Hi, everybody. It's Tim Derling, and this is Tim's Final Confessions. I want to thank everybody for watching this episode. Trying something a little different on this, and as some of you know, there's always a certain amount of trepidation when I try something different. It usually doesn't always work, but I do wanted to try something different, although it is a familiar subject. On this episode, I'm going back 40 years in time to recount the Billboard Top 200 albums. These were the top selling albums in the US on this date back in 1985, the entire 200 chart. But I want to try some screen sharing and I want to show these album covers off if I can. So see how this goes. Wish me luck. And I hope thanks for watching this, and yeah, we're going to see how this goes. So yeah, the Billboard chart 40 years ago today at number 200. It's Shannon, best known for her song "Let the Music Play" and her album "Do You Want to Get Away." This week it drops down from 182 down to 200, and I've never actually seen this album cover before, so here's what it looks like. That's Shannon, and Do You Want to Get Away? I don't know if anybody heard that or not. Somebody's cool. Anyway, so yeah, that's that. She never really followed up Let the Music Play with a big song that was anything quite like that. Next up is at 199, the Australian band Midnight Oil with their album Red Sails in the Sunset. This week it drops down to 199 and it's 6th week in the chart. They were about one album away with breaking really big. That would be the Diesel and Dust album. This next up at number 198, he was huge in the 70s. In the 80s, kind of tapered off, but he had a greatest hits album called the Manilow Collection, which managed to peak at 100. This week it drops from 160 to 198. So Barry Manilow. At number 197, this album actually peaked at 41. This is Lamal and his album Don't Suppose, which I guess this would have been his first solo album after leaving Kajagoogoo. I'm not sure how many albums he did, but what I didn't realize until going down a bit of a rabbit hole was that Kajagoogoo actually continued making albums without him. I did not know that. At 196, Graham Parker in the Shot with Steady Nerves. This was probably his biggest US album because it had his only top 40 single with Wake Up Next to You, which is a song that I remember hearing. It peaked at number 57. This week it drops from 164 to 196. At number 195, this is another album cover I'd never seen before until I looked it up. Stuart Copeland, of course, the Police drummer. This is his album, The Rhythmatist. We'll be hearing from one of his former bandmates coming up much later, but this week, Stewart's album debuts at 195. One of the longest running albums on this countdown, but not the longest, is ZZ Top's Eliminator. It's been out for almost 2 years at this point. In its 125th week on the chart, it drops down to 194. Not sure if that's its last week in the chart or not. Number 193, the debut album from Twisted Sister and Under the Blade. Now, this album came out in 1982 on Secret Records, but of course, with their success of the Stay Hungry album, Atlantic Records reissued it with a different cover, and that's the version that is hanging around at 193 this week. It only peaked at 125. At number 192, big country crossover artists had a lot of hits. Someone is having a lot of fun revving their engine. Ronnie Millsap and Greatest Hits Volume 2. This week it drops down. Well, no, it climbs. I'm sorry. It climbs from 195 up to 192. At number 191, this is Paul Hardcastle. You know him from the song 19. His album Rainforest, it actually drops down from 181 to 191 this week. At number 190, no, that is not Billy Squire at first glance. That is David Sanborn and his album Straight to the Heart. David Sanborn, well-known saxophone player, played with Bowie, played with a bunch of people. This week his album drops down to climbs up to 190. It would eventually peak at 64. At number 189, this is interesting. This is Chaka Khan's album, I Feel For You. Of course, the title song was a huge hit. The album peaked at number 14. Now, last week it was at 200 and it's climbing back up the chart to land at 189 this week. I'm not sure why it's climbing back up the chart, but I do know that she had her music featured in Miami Vice, which was one of the biggest shows on TV at this time. Maybe that was it. Maybe somebody in the comments can tell me what that was all about. At 188, now this is a well-known R&B band. I don't know any of their music, but Maze featuring Frankie Beverly, their album Can't Stop the Love, got as high as number 45. This week it drops down 173 to 188. Now here's a bit of a surprise. At number 187, now this is the oldest album in this chart. It originally peaked at number 2 back in 1971, and last week it re-entered the chart. This week it's up to 187. Of course, I'm talking about the fourth Led Zeppelin album. Now, I can only assume this is due to Led Zeppelin appearing at Live Aid, which was a little over a month earlier to when this chart came out. Number 186. I've never seen this album before either. This curious little album is called Profiles, and it's by Nick Mason and Rick Fenn. Nick Mason, of course, drummer from Pink Floyd, and Rick Fenn was a member of 10cc. And this week, the album Profiles climbs from 191 up to 186. Debut album from Julian Lennon, Valot, peaked at 17. This week, it drops from 165 down to 185. At number 184, The Style Council and their album Internationalists. It climbs up this week from 187 up to 184, not a huge jump. A band that's so big, all three of their albums are in this chart. Motley Crue, their debut album, Too Fast for Love. It originally peaked at 77. This week, it's down from 159 to 183. The late, great Marvin Gaye and Dream of a Lifetime. This was his first album to be released posthumously. Of course, there were a few. This album came out, in 85, a year after he passed away. Peaked at 41 this week. It drops down from 148 to 182. Another long-running album in this chart, Billy Joel and An Innocent Man. It peaked at number 4. It had several hit singles. This week it drops down. No, it's actually climbing back up. It's climbing from 186 to 181. Here's an album I'm guaranteed you may have never seen it before, but you've heard a song off it. This is the debut album from Animotion, which featured their big hit Obsession. Now, this album actually peaked at 28, and this week it drops down from 153 to 180. Another artist who's just tearing up the charts, and it was bigger than he'd ever been, bringing his old catalog with him, or some of it, Bruce Springsteen. And his 1980 album, The River, is re-entering the chart this week at 179. Another good point that my buddy Eric brought up to me is that it could be the fact that this is the first time some of these albums were available on CD and people were buying them that could afford them, I might say. Number 178, the debut album from Howard Jones called Humans Lib. This week it drops down from 167 to 178, and it peaked at number 59. At number 177, Scorpions, and what was really, in a lot of ways, their worldwide breakthrough album, Love It Per Sting. It peaked at number 6. This week it's climbing back up the chart, 183 up to 177. At 176, this is the Various Artists album, We Are the World, USA for Africa, plus a bunch of other songs. It peaked at number 1, of course. This week it drops down from 146 to 176. Now, at 175, we have The Curious Tale of Men at Work. Their first two albums, Business as Usual and Cargo, were both successful albums. Both had several hit singles off of them, 80s defining hit singles. And in 1985, they released the third album, Two Hearts, and it dropped like a stone, only peaked at number 50. And this week it drops from 135 to 175. At 174, we have Canada's Gino Vanelli with his album Black Cars. Now, this was not a successful album in the US. It only peaked at 62, and this week it drops from 158 to 174. In Canada, of course, it was another story. The title song from this album was one of Gino's biggest hits. Came close to cracking the top 40 in the US, but definitely wasn't the song the hit song that it was here in Canada. If you ask most fans in Canada of a certain age, what's the first Gino Vanelli song that comes to mind? Chances are it'll be Black Cars, and I know that wouldn't be the case in the U.S. or in other parts of the world. Another huge artist that still well known today. He's no longer with us, but big enough to be bringing previous albums up. Prince and his album 1999 originally peaked at number 9. This week it's climbing back up the chart, 177 up to 173. One thing I love about doing these chart countdowns, especially the album chart countdowns, is I'm seeing artists and albums I'm not really familiar with. This is Lonnie Mack and his album Strike Like Lightning. I don't know much about Lonnie Mack. I just know that he's a blues player. And this week, this album climbs from 179 up to 172. Big name on the country charts, of course. Comes from a country music family, Hank Williams Jr. and his album 5-0. This week, it climbs from 176 up to 171. Chicago 17. Which is a big comeback album for this group. Peaked at number 4. This week it drops down from 150 to 170. Another Springsteen album making its appearance on this chart. This one was originally from 1978, Darkness on the Edge of Town. Peaked at number 5 originally. This week it's climbing up from 175 to 169. Soundtrack to the movie Amadeus is at 168 this week. It's climbing up from 171. Amy Grant with her album Straight Ahead. Now, this was from a year previous, and this is her, I think, the last album she did before she started making that move over to sort of secular pop music. But this week, the Straight Ahead album is climbing up the chart, 174 up to 167. Some of you will know this. Some of you will scratch your head and go, what am I looking at here? Rockin' Sydney. And this is My Toot Toot, which is basically all about the one song. It was a novelty song. It was like he was like a Zydeco performer, played accordion, and this was a novelty song that got a lot of play back in 1985. And the album it belongs to is holding this week at number 166. At number 165, this was the biggest, I think, international album for Marillion, Misplaced Childhood. This week it climbs up from 170 to 165. Number 164, this name of this group and this album cover would probably never make it today, the Fat Boys. Early hip-hop group. It actually peaked at 48. This week it drops from 133 down to 164. Funk legend George Clinton and his album Some of My Best Jokes Are Friends. This album is holding this week at 163. This is another name I recognize, but not being a blues aficionado, I'm not overly familiar with Roy Buchanan, but this is his album When a Guitar Plays the Blues, and it's holding at 162 this week. The Smiths are at 161, climbing up 7 spots with their album Meat is Murder. At number 160, this is Michael Franks, who I think is sort of a jazz, maybe new age artist, not really sure, but this is his album Skin Dive, and this week it climbs up 1 position up to 160. Check out the mullet. Look at this mullet. This is like the definitive 80s mullet. Actually, these guys too have them. This is the group King and their album Steps in Time. This week it jumps from 178 up to 159. Now, this is definitely the longest consecutive album in this chart. I mean, it needs little introduction. Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. This week it climbs from 169 up to 158 in its 588th week on this chart, and it would stay on this Billboard chart for another 3 years before it would finally drop out. At number 157, this is Leonard Bernstein conducting West Side Story. This must have been a more modern production of West Side Story. This week it's holding at 157. Number 156, also holding this week. This is the R&B group One Way with Wrap Your Body. Number 155, 3 weeks on the chart. This week it's climbing up from 172. This is Herb Alpert and his album Wild Romance. Alison Moyet with her debut solo album Alf featured the hit Invisible. Peaked at 45. This week her album drops 127 down to 154. This is the second album from Mr. Mister. This was a huge, huge album. 3 big hit singles off of this one. Welcome to the Real World. In its second week in the chart, it went from 189 up to 153. One of the pioneers of hip hop, Run DMC. This is their debut album. This week, it drops down 1 spot from 151 to 152. Number 151, Mick Jagger with his solo album She's the Boss. It peaked at 13. This week, it drops 132 down to 151. So this is a new age classical artist, Andreas Vollenweider. That's an educated guess on how to pronounce his name. This is his album White Winds, and it climbs up from 155 to 150. That's kind of a cool album cover there. At number 149, this is Atlantic Starr with their album As the Band Turns. It peaked at 82. This week, it drops 142 down to 149. Now, here's another older album in the chart, originally released in 1982, George Thorogood and the Destroyers, Bad to the Bone. And this week it drops down 1 notch, down to 148. Number 147, climbing up 2 notches, one of the biggest country bands of all time, Alabama, and their album 40 Hour Week. 147 this week, and its 29th week on the chart. Going to have a few soundtracks here, of course. This is the soundtrack to the movie Perfect, which I've never seen. All I have seen are many, many, many parodies of at least one part of this movie. This week it's at 146, down from 116. 90 weeks in the chart for Cyndi Lauper's debut, She's So Unusual. It peaked at number 4. This week it's just down 1 notch to 145. At number 144, a band that, in my opinion, should have been much better than they actually were, The Firm, and their self-titled debut album. It peaked at 17. This week it drops to 144. Peabo Bryson and Take No Prisoners. Peebo's album would peak at 102. This week it drops down from 140 to 143. An artist we lost way too soon. I think he passed away back in 2007. Dan Fogelberg and his album High Country Snows. It peaked at number 30. This week it's down from 120 to 142. At 141, it's holding this week, New Order and their album Low Life. Here's another soundtrack. Weird Science. Big jump this week. Debuted last week at 184. This week it's up to 140. Of course, it features Oingo Boingo doing the title song. It also has the Broken Homes. Never heard of them. Chain or Shane. Don't know. Wall of Voodoo. Yes, I know them. Ira and the Geeks. No idea. Wild Men of Wonga. Do not know. Taxi. That's a UK group. Vaguely heard of them. Max Carl. Ended up in 38 Special briefly. Kim Wilde. Yes. Lords of the New Church. Yes. And Killing Joke. See, this is what was great about soundtracks. What a weird mixture of artists. I'm guessing they were all, or at least most of them, on the same label. At number 139, the solo debut from Yngwie Malmsteen. Yngwie Malmsteen's Rising Force peaked at 60, and this week it drops from 134 to 139. Another solo debut, David Lee Roth's EP, Crazy from the Heat. This week it drops from 128 to 138. At 137, New Edition. This album peaked at number 6. This week it drops down to 137. You can see the fresh faces here, most of whom would go on to become very, very successful even outside of this group. At number 136, Motley Crue's second album, Shout at the Devil, originally peaked at 17. This week it's climbing back up from 143 to 136. With 96 weeks in the chart as of this particular chart, Lionel Richie's Can't Slow Down is climbing back up from 139 to 135. Of course, it peaked at number 1. A group that was better known for their gimmick of replacing members once they reached a certain age, because I could not name you one of their songs, Menudo. And this, I can only assume this is their first album. It peaked at 100. This week it's climbing up to 134. Another band that was big but hadn't quite broken to huge levels at this point, U2 and their third album, War. It peaked at 12 back in 83. This week it's climbing back up the chart from 138 to 133, and I'm going to once again guess this is an effect of the Live Aid broadcast. At 132, I'm not familiar with this group, Boogie Boys, their album City Life. Second week in the chart, climbs up from 145 to 132. At number 131, this album peaked at 48. This week it drops down 103 to 131. Kim Carnes and her album Barking at Airplanes. More Bruce Springsteen. Born to Run, his third album from 75. Peaked at number 3 originally. This week it climbs up 136 to 130. At 129, Daryl Hall, John Oates, Big Bam Boom. This album peaked at number 5. This week it drops from 121 to 129. This does not look like a 1985 album to me. This looks like something out of the 60s. This is Joe Walsh in his album The Confessor. I don't know any songs from this album. Peaked at 65. This week it drops 123 down to 128. Great Canadian band, never broke big into the States. This is Helix with their 5th album, Long Way to Heaven. It only peaked at 103. This week it drops from 119 to 127. Bryan Adams, doing great business in 1985 all over the world. This week, his third album, Cuts Like a Knife, drops down from 124 to 126. I'm going to say a movie more known for its soundtrack, because a lot of people know the soundtracks, mostly Motown. Originally came out in 1983, The Big Chill. This week it climbs back up from 130 to 125. At number 124, Eric Clapton in his album Behind the Sun. It peaked at 34. This week it's dropping from 111 to 124. The all-female group Climax in their album Meeting in the Ladies' Room. This had a big song on it called I Miss You. This week the album drops from 110 down to 123. The soundtrack to the Talking Heads concert film Stop Making Sense drops or climbs up this week from 129 to 122. More U2. This is their live EP Under a Blood Red Sky. Originally peaked at 28. This week it's climbing up to 121. Number 120. This is another early hip-hop group, Houdini. This is the album Escape. It peaked at 35. This week it drops 113 down to 120. British duo Go West. This is their debut album. It peaked at number 60, doing better in their native UK. And this week it drops from 109 down to 119. Number 118, this is Carly Simon and her album Spoiled Girl. Not a successful album. It only peaked at number 88, and this week it drops down 3 to 118. The Daz Band and their album Hotspot. In its 4th week in the charts, climbing up 125 up to 117. The duo Renee and Angela and A Street Called Desire. This album drops down from 96 to 116 this week. At number 115, the soundtrack to the James Bond film A View to a Kill. Of course, this had the hit title song from Duran Duran. This week it drops from 90 to 115. The UK metal band Grim Reaper and their second album, Fear No Evil. This week it drops from 112 down to 114. Now, this is something I had never, this is an artist I would never have heard of before. Dr. J.R. Cool and the Other Roxannes. This is called The Complete Story of Roxanne. I know that in the mid 80s there were what has been known as the Roxanne Wars. I think early versions of what they would now call diss tracks, sending songs back and forth. This week, this album climbs up one from 114 to 113. If it sounds like I don't know what I'm talking about, I really don't. Number 112, the Pointer Sisters. This was a big album for them, Breakout. It peaked at number 8. This week it drops from 95 down to 112. Another huge album, still hanging around on the chart after 61 weeks, Prince and the Purple Rain soundtrack, Prince and the Revolution. This week it drops from 105 to 111. Another Yngwie Malmsteen album. This is his second album, Marching Out. It's new this week at number 110. And the group that gave us the original Roxanne song, specifically Roxanne, Roxanne, I think I've got that right, UTFO, and their self-titled album drops from 107 down to 109 this week. The Commodores, with their biggest success they had after Lionel Richie left, the album Night Shift. The title song was a big song. This album peaked at number 12. This week it drops 100 down to 108. Julio Iglesias and his album Libra. This week it climbs from 118 up to 107. This is the group Confunction, which I'm not really familiar with. Their album's called Electric Lady. This week it climbs up 108 to 106. Another one of the biggest artists of this time period, Phil Collins, his second solo album, Hello, I Must Be Going. Originally, it peaked at number 8 in 1982. This week, it's climbing back up the charts, 117 up to 105. A new album from the Beach Boys in 1985, self-titled, peaked at 52. This week, it drops from 81 down to 104. At number 103, Foreigner with their album Agent Provocateur, peaked at number 4. This week, it drops 97 to 103. Second Dokken album, Tooth and Nail, peaked at 49, would eventually go platinum. This week it's dropping from 94 down to 102. On the chart this week at number 100. The debut album from Lone Justice climbs from 102 to 99 this week. Tears for Fears, this is their debut album, The Hurting. Initially peaked at 73. It's probably re-entered the charts due to the success of their second album, which we are going to get to this week. The Hurting drops down 89 to 98. At number 197, the debut album from the country foursome known as the Highwaymen. At the time, they were just going by their individual names, of course, Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, Johnny Cash, and Chris Christopherson. And this album this week climbs up a notch to 97. Oddly enough, the only one of these guys left is Willie. Number 190, or number 96, it's Glenn Frey with, I believe, his second solo album, The All Nighter. It peaked at 22. This week it drops 82 down to 96. Kenny Loggins and his album Vox Humana peaked at 41. This week it drops from 88 to 95. The punk band X and their album Ain't Love Grand on its way up this week in its fourth week in the chart, climbing 99 up to 94. Rick James and his album Glow, not a big album for him, peaked at number 50. This week it's holding at 93. REO Speedwagon Wheels Are Turning. This album gave them 4 top 40 singles. Peaked at number 7. This week it drops from 69 down to 92. The debut album from Suzanne Vega, her second album. She would score her best known song with Luca, but for now her debut holds at 91. At number 90, moving up 2 spots, it's John Denver and his album Dreamland Express. Number 89, it's Bob Dylan with his album Empire Burlesque. The album peaked at 33. The vocal quartet Manhattan Transfer is climbing up from 101 to 88 with their album Vocalese this week. U2 with their album The Unforgettable Fire peaked at number 12. This week it's down 83 to 87. The jazz artist Stanley Jordan and his album Magic Touch. This album climbs up 1 notch this week from 87 up to 86. Depeche Mode and really what would be their North American breakthrough, People Are People. This week this drops from 79 down to 85. One of the many Paisley Park albums that are groups, artists that Prince had a hand in. The Family. It's the debut album, new this week at number 84. This album is notable for containing an early version of his song, Nothing Compares to You. At number 83, Brian Ferry and his album Boys and Girls. Peaked at 63 this week. It dropped 77 to 83. Madonna, her debut album, peaked at number 8. This week it's still in the chart. After 2 years, it's dropping from 78 to 82. First really big album in North America for Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, known by DJs everywhere as OMD because it's easier to say, and the album Crush. This week it's up 84 to 81. Debut solo album from Phil Collins, Face Value, on its way back up. 85 up to 80 this week. It peaked at number 7. Lisa had Cult Jam with Full Force. Their debut album this week climbs from 106 all the way up to 79 in its second week on the chart. Robert Plant's third solo album, Shaken and Stirred, this week is down from 70 to 78, and it peaked at number 20. Number 77, Supertramp with their album Brother Where You Bound, their first album without Roger Hodgson. This week it's down from 65 to 77. Weird Al Yankovic, with his third album, Dare to Be Stupid, it peaked at 50, and this week it dropped 67 down to 76. Debut album from the band Cock Robin, which is not a band that you hear about these days. They had a minor hit single called When Your Heart Is Weak. Their debut album is up from 80 to 75 this week. Michael McDonald with, I believe this is only his second solo album, No Looking Back. It's new this week at 74. Cameo and the album Single Life peaked at 58. This week it drops 62 down to 73. Patti LaBelle and her album Patti. This week it climbs up 3 spots, 75 up to 72. The late Laura Branigan with her album Hold Me. This week it's up 2 spots, 73 to 71. Number 70, moving up 2 spots. And I believe this is where it would peak. Y&T's live album Open Fire. Another album from the Fat Boys. This is called The Fat Boys Are Back. Again, it's hard to believe this got off the ground. But this week it's up from 86 to 69, second week on the chart. Pretty big jump. Number 68, Don Henley's Building the Perfect Beast, peaked at 13. This week's down from 59 to 68. Another huge album of the 80s, Huey Lewis and the News and Sports. 101 weeks on the chart at this point. It was a number 1 album. This week it drops, or it's climbing back up, 71 up to 67. Jazz fusion group Spyro Gyra, holding this week with their album Alternating Currents. Cheap Trick and their album Standing on the Edge. In its 4th week of the chart, it's climbing up from 74 to 65. Depeche Mode with their album Some Great Reward. This week it drops down from 61 to 64. John Cafferty and the Beaver Brown Band, their album Tough All Over. It peaked at number 40 this week. It's holding at 63. Katrina and the Waves, self-titled album, peaked at 25. This week it's down 4 spots to 62. Run DMC, I think this was their second album, King of Rock, would peak at 52. This week it drops from 56 down to 61. Big comeback album for John Fogerty, Centerfield, was a #1 album, and this week it drops from 47 to 60. Best known for the song Cry from this album. This is Godley and Cream, famous video directors, former members of 10cc. Their album, The History Mix Volume 1, climbs up from 64 to 59 this week. UB40, Little Bag of Rhythm. That's fun to say. This week it climbs up 68 up to 58. We mentioned Rick James a while back. These were his proteges, the Mary Jane Girls, and their album Only For You. This album peaked at 18, and this week it drops 52 down to 57. Jeff Beck and his album Flash. It peaked at 39. This week it is dropping from 41 to 56. Philadelphia band The Hooters and their first album, or their first major label album, Nervous Night, holding at 55 this week. John Waite and his album Mask of Smiles is climbing the charts. This week its second week, it's 60 up to 54. Jimmy Buffett's album The Last Mango in Paris holds at 53 this week. The latest album from George Thorogood and the Destroyers, Maverick, is climbing up this week, 54 up to 52. Air Supply's self-titled album peaked at 26. This week it drops down to 51 from 44. Former member of the Time, Jesse Johnson, his album Jesse Johnson's Review peaked at 43. This week it drops from 45 down to 50. Huge jump this week. Wow. This has got to be the biggest jump of the week. In its second week, the third Dio album, Sacred Heart, climbs from 185 up to 49. That is a huge jump. This album peaked at 37. This week it's holding at 48. Bon Jovi's second album, 1700 Degrees Fahrenheit. First album by Till Tuesday, Voices Carry, peaked at 19. This week it's down from 43 to 47. Loose Ends, the album's called A Little Spice. This week it's at number 46, up from 49. Luther Vandross, The Night I Fell in Love, would peak at number 19. This week it's up 51 to 45. The Motels and their album Shock. It's in its fourth week in the chart. This week it climbs from 50 up to 44. Big soundtrack from the 80s, Beverly Hills Cop. Lots of hit singles from this one. Peaked at number 1. This week it drops 35 to 43. Another soundtrack, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. This week it climbs from 46 up to 42. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers album, Southern Accents. This week it's just up 1 notch to 41. This album peaked at number 7. Debut album from Norway's Aha, Hunting High and Low. Big jump this week, 57 up to 40. Rick Springfield's album Tao peaked at 21 this week. It drops from 36 down to 39. The debut album from Ready for the World, self-titled, this week jumps from 40 to 38. Sade's debut album Diamond Life peaked at number 5. This week it's holding at number 37. Survivor's Vital Signs peaked at number 16. This week it drops down 33 to 36. Amy Grant with her album Unguarded. This week it jumps from 38 up to 35. DeBarge and the album Rhythm of the Night peaked at number 19. This week it drops from 32 down to 34. One of the biggest comebacks of the 80s, Tina Turner, Private Dancer. This album peaked at number 3, and this week it's climbing back up the chart, 39 up to 33. AC/DC's album Fly on the Wall, 8 weeks in the chart this week. It zips up to 32 from 34. The UK band Dead or Alive, Youthquake, is holding this week at number 31. A group that would go on to be one of the biggest bands of the early 90s. They were making inroads at this point. REM and their album Fables of the Reconstruction. This week it's holding at number 30. A big album for Billy Ocean, Suddenly. It peaked at number 9 this week. It drops from 27 down to 29. R&B singer Freddie Jackson, his album Rock Me Tonight climbs up 1 this week to number 28. Howard Jones' second album, Dream into Action, peaked at number 10 this week. It's climbing back up 1 spot, 28 up to 27. Kool and the Gang's album, Emergency, peaked at 15 this week. It's holding at 26. Pointer Sisters, their latest album, Contact, is holding at 25 this week. Big comeback album for Aretha Franklin, Who's Zoomin' Who? This week it's holding at 24. And 4 in a row that are holding. This is Talking Heads and their album Little Creatures. This is holding at 23 this week. At number 22, the debut album from the supergroup Power Station, peaked at number 6 this week. It drops 15 to 22. At number 21, St. Elmo's Fire Soundtrack, climbing up 1 up to number 21. Second album from Montreal's Corey Hart and Boy in the Box, holding at 20 this week. Also holding is the second album from the UK's Paul Young and The Secret of Association, number 19. The Back to the Future soundtrack in its 7th week is climbing up from 21 to 18. Scorpions' live album, Worldwide Live, is at number 17 this week, up 1 spot. Madonna's Like a Virgin peaked at number 1 this week. It's still hanging in at number 16. It's holding this week. The second album and the breakthrough from Wham, Make It Big, peaked at number 1. This week it's climbing back up, 17 up to 15. Eurythmics with the album Be Yourself Tonight peaked at 9. This week it drops from 12 to 14. Third album from Night Rangers, 7 Wishes, holding this week at number 13. It peaked at number 10. Rat's second full-length album, Invasion of Your Privacy, peaked at 7 this week, just drops down a little bit, 10 down to 12. Prince and the Revolution, the follow-up to Purple Rain, Around the World in a Day, holding at 11 this week. It peaked at number 1. Big comeback album from Heart, their self-titled album, is entering the top 10 from 14 this week. Debut album from Whitney Houston, holding at number 9 this week, and its 24th week in the chart. Motley Crue's Theater of Pain peaked at number 6, dropped to 7, now it drops to number 8, so very consistent. Billy Joel, Greatest Hits Volume 1 and 2 this week, goes from number 8 up to number 7. Phil Collins' third album, No Jacket Required, number 1 album this week. It's staying put at number 6. Bruce Springsteen, Born in the USA, holding at number 5 this week. Bryan Adams' Reckless, number 1 album this week. It's still in the top 5 at number 4. Tears for Fears, their second album, Songs in the Big Chair, drops down 1 spot to number 3 this week. Sting's debut solo album, The Dream of the Blue Turtles, moves up 1 to take the number 2 spot, and the number 1 album also features a little bit of Sting. Dire Straits, Brothers in Arms, is 14th week in the chart, staying at number 1 this week. And those are the top 200 albums this week, according to Billboard magazine. I hope this came out all right. Hope you enjoyed this little different approach to the charts. And yeah, what are your favorites from this chart? A lot of great stuff, a lot of variety. I always look at the variety and think, why isn't it like that now? But that's because I'm old. Anyway, listen, hope you enjoyed this episode of Tim's Vinyl Confessions. We'll see y'all later.